Yes, it's Joe Walsh.
It's like your favorite station.
Hey y'all, this is Kristin Casey, author of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh.
Just like they do on the radio.
And you are listening to Joe K on the Play That Rock and Roll podcast. Now it's all about the podcast, and I'm telling you, Joe K is one of the best.
This is not a test. This is Play That Rock and Roll Podcast Edition. I'm your host, Joseph K., and like the song at the start says, just call me Joe. Today is part 2 of my conversation with Kristin Casey, author of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh. If you listened to part 1 of that conversation, you heard us discuss several aspects of Joe's life and career, like his sidekick Rick Rosa's, the album Got Any Gum, the short-lived supergroup The Best, his reunion with the Eagles, and Kristin also talked about what it's like being the partner of someone who's a celebrity. Today in part 2, we're going to take the focus a little bit off of Joe and talk about some of the other rock and roll icons that she crossed paths with during her time with Joe. People like Ringo Starr, Stevie Nicks, Bob Dylan, Clarence Clemons, Levon Helm, and also some more obscure characters like Dave Edmunds and Wolfman Jack. And in the second half of the interview, Kristin gives great insight into the nature of drug addiction and the bizarre logic of an addict who resists recovery and sobriety. Kristin's descent into drug addiction and subsequent struggle out of it and road to recovery are huge parts of this book and have made it a very popular memoir on what I call the recovery circuit. She's been on a lot of podcasts where she talks about addiction, survival, and recovery. And because it's such a huge part of her book, I didn't want to skip over that because it really is an important aspect to her story, and she had some very good insight on the subject. Kristin and Joe Walsh are both sober now, but they had very different paths to sobriety. And we talk about how each of them found their ways out of said addiction. So there's some pretty heavy stuff in the second part of the interview, but it's really interesting, and I think it's important for us to be aware of because, as she pointed out in the first half of our conversation, drug addiction and rock and roll are very closely related subjects. If you want to learn more, check out her website at kristincasey.com. On her website, you can find some more of her writings. You can find her social media pages there. You can find out information about her work as an intimacy coach. We talked a little bit about that at the end of this interview. And also, most importantly, you can find out how to buy her book, which is now out in paperback. And finally, if you listened to part 1, you know I was having a little bit of an audio issue in that interview. Unfortunately, that issue is here as well. Basically, the long and short of it is, I recorded this interview on a webcam, and the audio on that file was not great. Kristin sounded great. I sounded like I was underwater. So I replaced the audio of my questions with audio ripped from my camcorder, which I had running as a backup. Not really a big deal because you can hear both of us talk clearly, but if you're paying close attention, you might notice a slight fluctuation between the audio of my questions and her answers. It probably annoys me more than anyone else listening, but for what it's worth, I am getting that straightened out on my end, so hopefully it won't be an issue in the future. So with that, thank you for stopping by. Hope you enjoy this interview. Here is part 2 of my discussion with Kristin Casey, author of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh. I pulled a number of celebrities and rock and roll stars that I'm a huge fan of that you crossed paths with. And let's just give sort of a brief impression of how you liked them and how they acted towards you. And maybe a fun memory if you have it. You can say whatever you want on it. And because some of these I'm really curious about, and I think you have some good stories for them. So let's start with an easy one. He just had his 80th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned him already, Ringo.
Yeah, loved him, just adored him. I mean, what I knew about the Beatles before that was I didn't have the internet, didn't do a ton of like research on the Beatles. I mean, I loved their music, but you always got the sense that Ringo was the least maybe philosophical or spiritual or deep or whatever of the band. But the man that I met, he'd been sober for 2 years. He was so gracious and sophisticated and authentic and warm and just a beautiful human being. And honestly, I say that for very practical reasons, but also just he had a vibe, that to this day, you just don't come across it very often. You just felt like this is a man with love in his heart. And he was very professional. He was in charge of everything. That tour, he had great people working for him. That tour went very smoothly, but he had a lot of people in that band who did not have their shit together, And so things could have gone awry much more than they did. But everything went really smoothly. Everybody had nothing but love for him. I mean, all the band members and the wives and the crew. And Barbara couldn't have been more lovely.
Oh, yeah.
And, from the first time we met, I never was a starstruck kind of person. I'm from the punk scene. I have that ethic. There's no sort of hierarchy. There's no elitist sort of put him on a pedestal in my mind. And yet when I met Ringo, I did all of a sudden go, oh my God, I'm meeting a Beatle. And part of that was because he just walked right up to me and kissed like both my cheeks like they do. And I very clearly kind of froze or, I was surprised, and he saw that and he tried to put me at ease and he made a little joke out of it. And every time I saw him backstage, he's always asking how I was doing, like genuinely wanted to know. Barbara really went out of her way to make me feel included. Couldn't have been sweeter. And it got to the point on the second tour where by then my crack addiction was out of control, and so out of control that this man that I just adored and respected so much, my crack took precedence over, respecting his boundaries and his rules. And I brought crack on the tour and I got busted. And he didn't just kick me off the tour. He, made sure I had a flight to either home if I wanted to go home or to his rehab center. And he called them to see if they had a bed for me. Like,
yeah.
Ringo Starr asked Betty Ford to get a bed ready for me. And he didn't have to do that. I don't know a single other person in Joe's life who would have done that.
Yeah.
I think the world of that man. And in fact, I did finally write him an amends letter like in 2002 or 3. And I didn't know how to get it to him. I sent it to one of Joe's people who promised that they would get it to him. Yeah.
Well, that's nice. One of my favorite stories is the night Stevie Nicks came to visit. That is such a funny story, and it's such a funny look at her during, again, sort of some years that are like, maybe I haven't read enough about Fleetwood Mac, but I don't know a lot about her in like the late 80s, early 90s. So what did you think of Stevie, especially knowing that she and Joe used to date? Was there any tension there on that front?
It's funny because Joe had mentioned that early in our relationship, but the way he had described it was, it was a tour thing. It was a road thing, a road relationship. We toured together, and he had downplayed it. And so a couple years later, 3 years later or something, I'm living with him. And he tells me he'd heard from Stevie and she was in town and wanted to have dinner with him. And so he had said, well, I'm in a relationship. And she had said immediately, well, bring her. I'd love to meet her. And so I was just beyond excited. I mean, I admit freely, I kind of fangirled out like, oh, what am I going to wear? Like I I was a huge Stevie Nicks fan on every level, personally, in a fashion sense, in a music sense. I mean, she was a goddess to me. And so I was super excited. And then Joe, Rick the bass player, and Gino Michelini were hanging out at the house, and Joe was laughing at me like I was, who cares what you wear? You know, it's just Stevie. And then either Rick or Gino, I forgot, said, she's probably more nervous about meeting you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then that's when I found out that she's been carrying a torch for Joe all these years, and he had never told me that. Yeah. And I was like, is this true? And Joe was like, I guess, I don't know. You know, like he's kind of, and I'm sure in his mind he's thinking, this is going to be the most awkward dinner ever. Because now, you know, but I was like, well, clearly she has very good taste. I mean, I couldn't fault her that. And the fact that she had been so gracious to, if she really was still in love with him, to invite me, and was so sweet to me. And she seemed nervous, you know. I don't know if it was nervous about being with him or nervous about meeting his girlfriend, or both. But she was so sweet, and she had this pendant stuck in her hair. So we show up at the restaurant, and she kept trying to get it out while she was talking with Joe and me. And I offered to get it out for her, and she's like, thank you. I've been trying to get this out for hours. And so I very carefully, I'm like, you know, I'm not going to harm one hair on the goddess's head. Stevie had that beautiful, you know, so I very carefully
really curly. Really curly.
She had it straight at the time. She had straightened it.
Oh, yeah. I remember the photo. Okay.
Yeah. And then she gave it to me, like, as a thank you gift. She's like, insisted I have it. Yeah. And yeah, she was just delightful. And then she comes, so we invited her to the house after dinner. And now keep in mind, she did not go to the bathroom at the restaurant. We were at La Toque on Sunset, and she never left the table. She got in our car and came with us to the house, never used the bathroom while she was there, even though she was there all night. So, and there was Coke being passed around. She never did any. Mm-hmm. And yet she was such a chatterbox, and her conversation was getting a little wackier and wackier as the night went on. And she had all this jewelry that she had taken off, and she kept putting it in different places. And, you know, there's like, I forget how many people were there, like 6 or 8 tops, not even that. And people kept bringing her jewelry and saying, will you put that in your purse? You know, and she kept, yeah, and then putting it somewhere else. And then eventually she gets on the piano and she's playing, and it's like 4 something in the morning, and we're all up there just sort of watching the Stevie show, and Joe is like, pulls me aside, like I'm dropping hints, she won't leave, and I'm like, oh, I got this, you know. So I sit down and I try to gently drop, you know, big hints about we're going to go to bed, and it's been so lovely having you here. And she's like, oh yeah, good night, you know, and like she's literally continues to play. Like she was the guest who wouldn't leave, and it was the strangest thing. And Rick the bass player was like cracking up behind us. Finally, Gino mentions that her limo is waiting in our driveway and has been all night. And so I go out there, and the limo driver is like clearly been in this position before, and he's like, I got this, just get her outside, I'll get her in the car. And like we had this whole sort of, you know, subversive strategy to get her away from the piano and outside so we could get rid of her. It was hilarious. I mean, I adored. And then she called the next day because she had left her jewelry at the house.
You guys didn't see that driver?
Oh my God, that driver was awesome. Like he knew exactly how to handle her. It was fantastic. But no, she was lovely. She was wonderful. And I hope she didn't take offense to that story, because I'm assuming she's read the book. The truth is, I mean, she wasn't on Coke, but I asked Joe about it. He said he thought she was on some sort of pills, and she has admitted as much, to being on some sort of pharmaceuticals at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, Klonopin.
In the interview I saw her, she said she had a pill addiction for a while, and it was in those years.
Yeah, she said, Klonopin, and she described that as worse than the Coke.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Klonopin, but...
I always thought it knocked you out, but your account is that she was very chatty, so, you know, that's just a testament to her personality. But what a life resume thing. Had to show Stevie the door.
Yeah, I know. I mean, just... That is probably my favorite story in the book for that reason, because it was the most unexpected celebrity experience ever.
Oh, yeah, I see that. Well, you know, what's funny is just like, I know that it wasn't too long ago where she did an interview, and she said the 2 great loves of her life were Lindsey Buckingham and Joe.
Do you still love him?
I will always love Joe.
it will probably be hard for me to ever find anybody else that ever makes me feel like Joe did.
And I don't know if you follow Fleetwood Mac, but last year she fired Lindsay. So
I'll tell you, Joe is one of the most unique men I've ever met.
Yeah.
He might be, I mean, I've never met anyone quite like him. And a lot of people who know him will say the same thing. He's an incredibly sensitive individual, but there's just something very, very special about him. It's hard to describe. And he's a little, he's a little different. The way he walks and talks and even looks is not what you would call conventionally, he's not attractive in that conventional sense. And yet there's something compelling and deeply lovable about him. And the fact that Stevie Nicks calls him the love of her life, he was the love of my life. That does not surprise me at all.
well, I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, and if you look at the insert "forgot any gum," that sort of echoes what you were saying. So that's really great. So okay, love that story. One character that I think doesn't get talked about enough, at least in rock and roll, but he is a legend, and one of my favorite guys is Dave Edmunds. So I wonder I really appreciated that you mentioned that you were a huge Dave Edmunds fan before you met him, right?
Yeah.
What did you think of Dave and Cece?
Oh, I love them so much. Breaking up with Joe was so painful on so many levels, but that was one part, that was definitely a factor, was that I lost my friendship with Cece and Dave. We loved them. It was, for the first time we had sort of a couple in the neighborhood,
Oh, sure.
and they were so fun to hang out with, and she was a good role model for me too. She was kind of teaching me how to be a rock star's partner, because she had it figured out and I did not. Dave couldn't have been lovelier. And it's funny because when I met him, it was at the rehearsals for the second Ringo tour. And I walked in and I knew who everyone was, and who I didn't know, I think somebody may have told me, but I didn't know who Dave was, but he was sort of captivating me. And I don't know if it was because I liked his look, but I definitely had the sense that I know that guy. I must have seen him on a CD cover or something, but I used to strip to his music. I hear you knocking, I stripped for 14 years total, from the time I was 18 to the time I was 40, in 3 different iterations. And I never didn't do I Hear You Knocking. I mean, it's one of the best songs to do on stage. I loved it. And they just got that signature sound that no one, when it's Dave Edmunds, right? You just do. And so it wasn't until he started playing, they're rehearsing, and as soon as he started playing, I was like, holy crap, that's Dave fucking Edmunds. I was shaking I was so excited. And then I met Cece, who is just a knockout, like the quintessential rock star girlfriend, wearing like black leather and lace and the big, boobs and the skinny everything else and the platinum hair. And I thought, oh Lord, she's, I was intimidated because she was such a knockout and such a classic LA rocker chick beauty. And then I met her, and she was the sweetest, to this day, maybe one of the sweetest women I've ever met in my life. And just kind of fell in love with both of them on that day. And so they were friends of ours. And then, Joe ended up picking a fight with Dave one night. And it was one of the saddest things ever, because Joe had a lot of jealousy whenever I would make friends. And I think that he, for some reason, just felt threatened by my friendship with them. And so he picked a fight with Dave one night. And I don't know if they've ever made friends again after that, but that was the end of it.
I remember that part of the book, and that is definitely one of the sadder elements. You have you went through some really tough, sad years, but that story sticks out as one of the, oh man, I wish there was a better conclusion to that. I have to wonder if maybe it was, you speak about his music so enthusiastically because he is so great. Was it low-key a competitive thing? Or do you think it was just cokehead, freaking out?
No, I think there might be a little thread of that, actually.
Oh, okay.
And I will say, Joe didn't have a lot of he certainly didn't express a lot of professional jealousies. I mean, one time he did say once, whenever he hears a really good rock song, he gets mad, like, damn, why didn't I write that?
Oh,
but,
sure, yeah.
It was kind of a joke that he made. It is possibly true that my admiration and love of this amazing rock guitarist was triggering an insecurity that he had developed about, where he was at in life, and that kind of sparked it. I think it was, that's possible.
Yeah, I think, because it sounds like Dave was in a better place at the time. But okay, so one of my other absolute favorite parts of the book, they were very brief bits, but I wonder if you can expand upon them a little. And this is, I guess, sorry, my gossipy side, so you'll have to indulge me, but your interactions with Lita Ford, whose birthday it is today, and Bonnie Raitt.
Yeah, so I should say right off the bat that I've never heard anyone speak ill of either of them.
No, me neither.
And I have musician friends here in town who have played with Bonnie and just love her. Like men who are really, they respect her, and everyone speaks very highly of her.
And maybe I am saying that on occasion, Joe Walsh doesn't actually use the best discretion when it comes to women. He once was asked to describe Bonnie Raitt and really didn't do it well.
Well, when I met her, I said, Bonnie, I don't know how to say this. Obviously, I didn't, but I said, you play amazing slide guitar for a girl.
Little jealousies can make people act strange.
Oh, sure.
And Bonnie had a thing for Joe. I mean, that's from what I understand. Maybe it was very short-lived, but I was wearing a very sexy dress that night backstage at the show, and when she walked past me, I was standing outside Joe's dressing room, and Joe had just been there, so she probably saw us together. And because I think Bonnie is very much about, achievement and female empowerment versus, attaching yourself to a rock star, which, I mean, let's admit, was kind of what I had done. So I think maybe I just sort of represented something to her that she has justifiable issues with. And to be fair, I was, it wasn't an inappropriate dress. It was, but it was sexy, and it was Joe's favorite, and it was a little low cut and tight. But she made the cattiest remark as she walked past me that was so stunning and stupefying to me. It just took my breath away. I couldn't quite believe I'd heard her say that. And it was a comment on the way I was dressed and exactly what she thought of it. And when I looked up at her, she's standing at the exit door with her friends, all of whom are mortified and embarrassed of what she just, and trying to find a way out. And they couldn't get past her. And she looked me dead in the eye and said something else to kind of drive it home with a satisfied smirk, and then left. And I was just dumbfounded. And I thought, she's human. Yeah, I know I've done something like that in my lowest moments and regret it. So, it's a story worth telling. I mean, I'm sorry. It's, it was a shitty thing to do to someone who was at a low point, and I thought it was funny. So I had to tell that story. Lita Ford, it was much more subtle. It was a much more minor kind of a thing, but she did give me she walked into Joe's dressing room once and was super excited to see him, just let herself right in, and is kind of being gushy, and then sees me and comes to a screeching halt and basically gives me a dirty look, and then just cuts short. I try to introduce myself, and she just kind of cuts me off and I think tells Joe, I'll see you later or something, and just turns around and storms out. And I just thought, I said to Joe, what just happened there? And if he hadn't acted like he didn't know what I was talking about, I might have questioned what I was thinking, which was that it clearly seems like they have a closeness that precludes, she didn't expect him to have a girlfriend. So I don't know if anything happened between them. I don't know if she just had a crush on him, but either she had a thing for him and was not expecting to meet his girlfriend, or they had a little fling. and she was pissed off that he had brought me to that show. I don't know.
You know?
And the thing is, I read her memoir, and that woman has been through hell.
Yeah.
And I do respect her tremendously as an artist. And I know people in Austin who know her, and they speak very highly of her.
Yeah.
It was one little incident that, I'm sorry, if you're a celebrity and you're going to act like that, you're going to end up in a book at some point. Right. So I make no apologies. But I do, no disrespect to either of those women. I think I hear nothing but great things about them from other people.
Those are two fun anecdotes because, like you said, these are human emotions. These are human reactions, and that's the side that I think it's important for fans to get exposure to when you have your rock gods and goddesses. Like, there's a fantasy element that they're gods and goddesses, but like the reality is like deep down they are human. They have the same emotions. They have the same gut reactions as any of us, and sometimes those aren't great.
Yeah, and I think celebrity worship in general, if you want to just pretend like they're not flawed human creatures, it doesn't do anyone. That's a disservice to everyone. It's a disservice to the people in their life who are being affected by their behavior, because they're sort of allowed to get away with a lot of things that they wouldn't normally. And it's not good for the celebrities themselves, because when you're not treated as a flawed human, you have no reason to address your flaws. And a lot of addictions maybe wouldn't have gotten so out of hand if somebody had called them on that kind of crap, or those behaviors earlier on. Maybe Don Henley and Glenn Frey wouldn't have such a terrible reputation about the way they treat people if someone had said, hey, you can't treat people like that.
Yeah.
Earlier on.
Yeah, that's and another person who probably could stand to hear that would be Gene Simmons. What you wrote about Gene was perfectly in line with everything else I've ever read about that guy. Yeah. I'm almost more curious. So Gene, when he met you, started hitting on you. What was Joe's reaction to that? Or maybe zoom out and tell me the whole interaction.
Yeah, so I met him backstage somewhere. I forget where. But he was, I think we were at the top of the stairs or maybe on a landing, and he was at the bottom of the stairs, and I was walking down. And by the time it might have been 10 steps or something like that. But by the time I got to the bottom of the stairs, I felt like he had undressed me and had sex with me twice in his head. Gene is a very sexual person. His mojo is not right under the skin. It enters a room before he does. He has that kind of mojo. But I'm sorry, you rein it in when you're meeting the girlfriend of a colleague or a friend. You just have to rein it in. And if you don't, there are boundary issues there. And I was a young, even though I was a stripper and pretty sophisticated about men, I didn't know how to, I could have pulled back. I wanted to be polite. I also am curious always to see how far someone's going to take something. So I wasn't encouraging it. I wasn't discouraging it. He took my hand. He's kissing my hand. I could have yanked it away, but I was just kind of like, this is interesting. Mm-hmm. Joe's standing right there. And he's non-confrontational. I suppose he could have said, dude, get your lips off my girlfriend.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want to be bothered, and I don't know. We did have an incredibly bad fight a couple of days later. I think it was like a really vicious, ugly fight that I never could understand. Where did that come from? And later I'm going through my journal, and I'm like, I wonder if that was something he stewed over and then used to blow up at me. Or there were times where that kind of stuff seemed to really bug Joe, and other times where it seemed like it should and it didn't. You never quite knew with him what was going to have an impact on him from one day to the next. But, really, Gene Simmons, just the way he was kissing my hand and looking into my eyes, and just the tone in his voice and the way he was standing. And, he's every woman I've ever read about her interaction with him is it fits along those lines. Yeah,
I hate that because like 10 or 15 years ago my mom met him, and she didn't ever tell me about like how it went, and I'm glad I don't know. But
that's even worse than your girlfriend. That's your mom.
You're right. Yeah. You know.
I didn't want to know.
So, and another point where you're saying where you should rein it in. Another place to rein it in would be on NPR during an NPR interview with Terry Gross. Did you ever hear him on NPR with Terry Gross?
No.
He is so disrespectful to her through that whole thing.
Let's get to the studded cod piece. Do you have a sense of humor about that? I mean, does that seem funny to you, or you?
No, it holds in my manhood. Otherwise,
yes, right.
It would be too much for you to take. You'd have to put the book down and confront life. The notion is that if you want to welcome me with open arms, I'm afraid you're also going to have to welcome me with open legs.
That's a really obnoxious thing to say.
No, it's not. Why should I say something behind your back that I can't tell you to your face?
Well, has it come to this? Is this the only way that you can talk to a woman to do that shtick?
Terry Gross, she's a national treasure.
Right. Icon, yeah.
And I'd like to think that the boring lady who's talking to me now is a lot sexier and more interesting than the one who's doing NPR.
Let's pivot to someone hopefully a little less sleazy, but maybe not, because I've heard stories. So it was New Year's Eve, 92 or 93, that you and Joe hung out at a party with Bob Dylan. What was Bob like to you? How did you interact with Bob?
I would say, Bob was one of those celebrities who, wasn't all that invested in getting to know me. I don't know if he would have been able to tell you my name at the end of the night. But the difference between him and, say, like Neil Young or Warren Zevon or someone like that, who was just very sort of center stage, a little touch of narcissism. That Bob wasn't like that. I didn't get that impression. I got the impression that Bob was just a little uncomfortable being in a crowded restaurant, probably because, he was somebody who had a lot of, constant press and fans on him all the time. So when he showed up, we were having dinner at La Toque on Sunset, and we had this big table. And when he and Debbie Gold showed up, who was his manager, I guess, or producer, I forget now, he kept kind of looking around, he just wanted the lay of the land, making sure nobody was going to like come up to him or whatever. I believe we were introduced, I think, but I don't have a memory of it, so I didn't mention in the book whether or not we were introduced. But I was talking to Danny Aykroyd, and I was getting quite a buzz on. I was drinking a lot of champagne. Yeah. I was having a fantastic time. But Danny and I were deep in conversation, or I was deep in conversation, and he was deeply allowing me to. He was very graciously allowing me to be
very patient.
Yeah, I was amusing him. He definitely had an amused look on his face because I was, just very drunk and very, very serious about this topic.
You know what's funny, though? If you hear Dan Aykroyd talk now about aliens and the crystal skull, probably anyone has the reverse interaction. Now he's you in that situation to anyone he's talking about, like, aliens and stuff with.
Oh, boy, I'm going to have to Google that.
I don't think we will ever have a formal relationship, a formal contact with any alien species out there, especially after 9/11. And honestly, I don't think they're a mass threat, but I do believe they're breaking the law. I'm serious. Title 18, 1202, read the Travis Walton story.
So how do you arrest them?
But I interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's what I'm doing tonight. That's going to be my reading for the night. I can't thank you for that.
Yeah.
But Bob, so Bob sits down finally, and, we have dinner, and there were people coming up to the table because just the whole restaurant was a bit of a party atmosphere, and Joe knew people from other tables, and so just people were coming. But I don't remember anyone really bothering Bob. He was sort of sandwiched between Rick and Joe, if I recall, and they were sort of protecting him. And he never did seem to kind of get too social or chatty or anything, but he seemed to relax a little bit. And then all of a sudden it was midnight or approaching midnight. So the whole staff like ushers the entire restaurant out to the street on Sunset to sing Old Lang Syne. And Joe sandwiches Bob between us.
Yeah.
And which Bob let him do. And so we're singing and swaying, and I'm just having a really good time. I wasn't like a huge Bob Dylan fan or anything. I kind of recognized that he was an icon, and but he seemed to me more than anything to just be a little uncomfortable and a little delicate, and I just wanted to make him feel comfortable. So at some point as we're singing, I kind of look up at him and I see him start to sing and relax a little bit, and I thought that was really sweet. Like he even smiled a little bit, and so that's my Bob Dylan story. Like he sort of slowly got into the groove of the atmosphere, and I noticed that everybody just really seemed to go out of their way to put him at ease, you know. But he wasn't, and I don't know, I've heard stories, I think, where he can be really arrogant or whatever, but I that wasn't my experience. He seemed genuinely to just not want to be bothered, to want to have a good time, but not want to be, you know, swarmed.
But just one of my favorite stories I love talking about when I think of Bob is because this is sort of that other side, that human side. Do you know Katey Sagal, the actress? Yeah, she's awesome. I'm a big fan of hers. I saw her do a concert in Milwaukee, and she did a Bob song. And she said that she got fired. She went in her younger days. She was a backup singer for Bob, and she got fired because guess what? She didn't go to bed with him. Yeah.
Wow, that's so disappointing.
Yeah, it is.
That's a shame. I hate to hear that. And good for her for being open about it.
Yeah,
that's a shame. I have to say, I'm glad you mentioned her, because Joe didn't mention a lot of like celebrity crushes or whatever. I mean, he was always a good boyfriend that way. Like every now and then he'd mention like so and so super hot. Like he loved the singer for the Bangles, actually. I think he liked her. But
I'll play Eternal Flame again for you real quick.
Yeah, no, thanks. No. Maybe that's why I hate the song. No. And who was that? There's this, I can't think of the name of the singer, but she wore these horn-rimmed glasses. She was a pretty brunette, and she wore these horn-rimmed glasses, and she had a big hit back then. Can't think of who it was, but he loved Katey Sagal. He always thought she was super hot.
From Married with Children? Was that his... Was that what he knew her from?
Yeah, I think that was big at the time.
Oh my God, that is so funny. I grew up watching that show. She was one of my first crushes too.
Oh really?
Yeah, that's where it started. I mean, and of course she was on Futurama. I liked Sons of Anarchy for a while, and then I found out she did music, and she does really good music too.
Yeah, she's brilliant. I don't know if he ever met her, but there's a chance that he actually knew her in person. But I think it speaks highly. Joe always liked strong women, and you know, even though her character was a little despicable on Married with Children, overall she was like a really outspoken woman. So I think any man who finds that attractive that's a good sign to me. That means that's a good guy.
That's awesome. Okay, these are such great stories. Now I do have a smaller list of rock stars and celebrities that you interacted with that unfortunately, sadly, are no longer with us. And I just wonder, like, what are some of your memories of who these guys were? And let's start with sort of an oddball one, because I recently reread your book to get ready for this, and I had totally forgot that you had mentioned Wolfman Jack, who has always struck me as like one of the most interesting figures of that like whole era. And he's in the radio song music video.
Yes, I say put your hands on the radio. I say, baby, you got the old Wolfman, and he gonna give you all the thrills and spills that rock and roll bills. Hallelujah. Yes, indeed, like this here one, it's Joe Walsh. Yes, it's Joe Walsh. And I want to tell you something. You hang on right now, because he's gonna be here for your personal enjoyment. It ain't gonna take long. It's called the radio song.
Yeah, I loved him. He was someone who just really treated me as my own individual person. He really went out of his way to get to know me. He had just showed up at the house one day. Joe had apparently told him about me, but just in passing, I think. I have a new girlfriend or whatever, but he just came over to see Joe. He had a few hours to kill before this business dinner, and Joe was busy a little bit doing something, I forget what. So I was mostly just entertaining him, talking with him, and he made me feel so good about myself. He called me the lady of the house, and he said I reminded him of his wife, who was also a very strong woman and knew how to handle like a a big ego, celebrity ego like his, and he said, I can tell that you can handle Joe that way too. And he talked a lot about kind of feminist topics, like he was just really, he was very smart and erudite and progressive and warm, and I was supposed to be the hostess putting him at ease, but he was putting me at ease. I just thought he was wonderful. He told me to call him Uncle Wolf, which we didn't interact. I don't know if we ever bumped into him again after that night, but it was lovely. I just got to hang out with him all evening, and then before he went to the business dinner, he asked if I could help him score some coke. And I was like, ran to my dealers, and I got a gram. And so I get him a gram, and he's like, okay, so you do some with me. I won't do any until you do. And I was like, well, I'll do a little bump, I guess, if you want. I've got my own, but okay, you know. And you just, it was really doing the good guest etiquette thing, like giving me some coke instead of showing up with a bottle of wine, I guess. And anyway, he dumped out the whole thing, and he's like, just do as much as you want, and I'll do the rest. And I'm like, this may not end well for you, Uncle Wolf. Yeah, because you don't know. I may be little, but I can do a lot of coke.
Oh, sure. God, that's funny. As a podcaster, I hope one day I can master that Wolfman Jack voice, but I'm nowhere near that. Did he speak
it's unparalleled.
Was that so? He spoke like that even off the air, right? Like he always had that back of the throat growl.
Yeah, I mean, his speaking voice, you could tell it was Wolfman Jack.
Yeah. Okay.
It was just a little bit less on air sounding.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But he had a very cool voice, a very cool look, very cool voice, very cool walk.
So one of the best concerts I ever saw, I see him whenever I can, is our Bruce Springsteen shows. And one of my favorite concerts, I saw Springsteen play in November 2009, and it ended up being the 10th last show that big man Clarence Clemons ever did. You know, and we didn't know he was sick or anything at the time, but he didn't look like he was in great shape. And I remember him being just the star of that show. And one of the things I'm so jealous of you, of many things, is you got to see him every night on those all-star dates.
Yeah.
What was it like seeing and interacting with the big man?
Oh, he was so great, you know, because you go backstage and everyone in that first band had their own personality, you know, like Levon and I kind of bonded, you know, he's a good old country boy from Arkansas, if I recall, and we just clicked, but you know, he was just a little bit of a soft-spoken country boy. And then you had Jim Keltner, who was really kind of quiet, and Dr. John, who could be talkative or quiet, and he had that thick accent. I didn't always know what he was saying. But they were all so sweet to me. Everyone in that band was super sweet. Billy Preston didn't go out of his way to be too social, but that was just who Billy was. He could be, there were times where he would like tell me my outfit looks beautiful or whatever. But Clarence was always, you could always count on him to just sort of have a lot of energy and be happy to see you. And, you know, he was fun on the bus. He just had a big personality and this big, beautiful smile. I remember that one of my sisters was backstage once at an LA show, and he saw me talking to her, and then he comes and grabs me like, who's that? Who's that? Like, my older sister's very pretty, beautiful blue eyes, just like china blue eyes, cute dimples, and I was like, that's my sister. I think she had a boyfriend at the time, but he's like, introduce me to her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, no, he was just great. And one of my favorite pictures of the whole time I was with Joe is of me and Clarence on a tour bus in Japan, because, I mean, he was like, let's take a picture together, and just got that big, beautiful smile. And
oh, yeah.
I just loved him. And, you know, his sax solos were such a powerful part of that band, too. It wouldn't have been the same band without him.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that must have been a highlight. Was Joe, I've seen Joe play with Bruce Springsteen before. Was he pretty good friends with Clarence, or did they not interact too much?
I don't know if they knew each other before, but they certainly were friendly on the tour. Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How about one of the times I saw Joe play was in 2012 in Naperville, in Illinois, and his band did a version of "I Shall Be Released" by the band, and he dedicated it to Levon Helm, who had just died recently. Was Joe? It sounds like Joe was pretty good friends with Levon. How did you like him? And was there a friendship between those two guys?
Yeah, I think so. I think that they really, I got the sense that they understood each other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just felt like, and I don't know, Joe, I could always see when Joe was with different people who made him relaxed, who he was in awe of, and who made him uncomfortable, or who made him feel like he had to be on, which meant he felt guarded for some reason. And I always felt like when he was around Levon, like they had a real natural ease between them, and I just kind of like they understood each other. And Levon just immediately, meeting Levon and his wife Sandy was just like being at a picnic or something and meeting some friends of friends and sitting down and having some, just chatting. It was just very relaxed. They were so real, down to earth. And Sandy always made me feel really comfortable because it was a little, Sandy and also Rick Danko's wife, whose name I'm going blank on, but they just really made sure that I felt a part of the group, and they gave me a sense of what it's like to be the partner of a rock star, and they were, because I was always surrounded by celebrities and men and musicians.
Oh, sure.
So I didn't have a lot in common with people that I was surrounded by constantly. And especially when I moved in with Joe, I didn't have a lot of friends in LA, and the ones that I did, I didn't see very much. And so on the Ringo tour, being around Rick Danko's wife and Levon Helm's wife, I finally had kind of like peers, girlfriends I could hang out with and talk with, and they were just lovely. I loved Rick Danko and his wife. She was Elizabeth.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. So I have to ask now, besides Don Henley and Glenn Frey and maybe Stevie Nicks, who did Joe get intimidated by?
One time he was expecting a call from, I'm going blank on his name. He was the producer. Also Willie Nelson. So a couple times, there were 2 phone calls in the years that I lived with him that he was like so excited and nervous about getting. And one was from Willie Nelson, and the other was from, and I have his memoir in the other room. I'll have to go take a peek and see what it is. I remember when Willie Nelson called, he was so nervous, and one of the reasons was because he had to tell Willie, I can't do Farm Aid, and he knew it. And so he was both, he was kind of like, he was very honored to be getting the phone call and to be asked, but he was also dreading it. And by the time the call was over, he'd agreed to do Farm Aid. whatever other obligation he had, he then had to go and, I have to change the date of that concert or whatever, because you can't say no to Willie. That's what he said. I cannot say no to Willie.
Golly, that is funny. So I'm going to try my hand at, like we talked about earlier, your book is full of, like you said, it's twofold. It's, the backstage rock and roll and the celebrity lifestyle, but it's also like the upside and a lot of the downside of addiction and how fucked up your life can get because of drugs and alcohol. So I'll ask sort of an entry-level question. What do you think are some of the best lessons that someone who is struggling with addiction or maybe like trying to get out of it, trying to get into recovery, what can they draw from your life story in your book that will, that they can apply to their lives?
Thanks for asking that. I would say, back then, we didn't know as much about addiction as we do now. There weren't as many options for someone who had alcoholism, addiction, or just a substance abuse problem, substance use disorder. You don't always have to be an addict to have your life, be in shambles. You can just have a disorder, and disordered drinking, disordered using. I would say that the definition of addiction is that you are helpless over that substance, right? I mean, if you're not helpless over it, you're not an addict. But what I didn't understand then is I wasn't helpless about getting help, reaching out, trying to get help. I was helpless against a substance, but on any given day, I could have been trying to, go to meetings or see a therapist, or so I had slipped into this comfortable place where I was allowing myself to be sort of led by the nose through life, by Joe, by his lifestyle, by the drugs and alcohol we were doing. And I didn't make a lot of I made some conscious choices and some unconscious choices. But the truth is, it wasn't until I looked back over my life and how did I end up where I ended up? Because I had every break in the world. You know, I was born, I'm a smart white woman in America. So I'm pretty privileged right there. I was given a free ride by UT. I was not physically abused at home. You know, I had some emotional, what I consider emotional abuse growing up, but I had a lot of breaks, and where I ended up was a very low place. And it wasn't all, I wasn't helpless against all of it. I made some conscious choices, and they were based in fear. So I think this idea that we're all victims, yes, I was a victim of certain circumstances, and I was very young and too young to handle certain things and was doing the best I could. But there were points along the way where I could have made different choices, and I wasn't making different choices. I was making choices that I would then later rationalize. This is why I'm doing this. It's best for everyone involved. It's the easiest thing. It won't rock the boat. It, you know, so I'm not a victim, or at least not a complete victim. And I've yet to meet an addict who is a complete victim. Every addict has made choices, consciously or unconsciously, that has helped them get where they are. It's also, unless you're in the grave, you can have one foot there, but unless you're fully in the grave, it's not too late. I've seen bottom of the barrel addicts who had a lower bottom than mine, you know, overcome it and rise to great heights. And no matter how far you think you have to go, because I had a long way to go. I was deeply in debt. I was very ill. I had cut off everyone socially. I had tremendous emotional issues. I was severely mentally ill when I got sober. I really was. I was delusional. I was suicidal. And it took a good 10 years before I got to a place in sobriety where I really got out of bed with any kind of enthusiasm for life.
Yeah.
I got out of, you know, I mean, I kind of decided to live grudgingly, and I had you know, good days and bad days, but for the most part, it was a good 10 years before I got to a place of real emotional stability. And if you'd have told me it would have taken 10 years, I'm not sure I would have made the decision to get sober. I think I might be 6 feet under right now. But the truth is, it's worth it. Everything that got me to the point of getting sober, and the next 10 years and the next 13 after that, I have an amazing life that is much better than I ever could have dreamed in every single way. And I'm not special in that way. Anyone living a life of addiction or substance abuse who doesn't believe they can have the life of their dreams or even a good life, you're flat out wrong. I mean, that's just the truth of it. You have much more control over your life than you probably realize, and there's a lot of help out there, so you have no excuses.
So it's a combination of, like, you know, admitting that you need help and going down those avenues where you can get the help, but also having a change of how you make decisions and taking some ownership of your life and your decision making.
And the truth is, there's so much shame that comes when addicts, all to a man, have tremendous amount of shame, so much so that we don't even admit how much to ourselves. And then when we get sober, we still can't admit it because it's so much that it would kill most people. I mean, the level of shame we have, it's going to come out little by little. And I wish there was a way around that, a way to alleviate that, because we're all fuck ups. But we're also human, and we made mistakes because we're flawed, not because because we have flaws, not because we're subhuman. You know what I mean? Like, there's no mistake you've made that means you're not a good enough creature to be alive or to have a good life. Like, if you think you're subhuman, read my book. I mean, if I can live the life I was living and come to love myself and love my life, then, you know, anybody can. Just, the shame is one of the biggest liars. It will convince you that you can't be who you want to be or have what you want to have because you don't deserve it. And it's such a travesty. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with getting sober, is that people come face to face with their shame, and it's terrifying. It's so awful, and we need to just let that go. Just let that go.
Yeah, no, I hear that, and it sounds like, well, you weren't, you're certainly not alone, even in your own book, of going through that process. Joe's sober now, and he's talked a lot about very similar topics, but he didn't. The big difference between you two is, like, you had to make the decision to turn your life around when it was like rock bottom, end of the line, sort of, very under duress. And it sounds like Joe made the decision to turn his life around when, are Don Henley and Glenn Frey scarier than dying? Because they came knocking, and then he got right in line, right? But in your book, you talk about how he was a little resistant to it.
Yeah, he was. Because had Joe really wanted to live a sober life, he would have gotten sober years earlier. He went to rehab, when we had just gotten together. We'd been together for a couple of years, and he went to rehab. It just didn't take.
Yeah.
So while he probably didn't want to be living the life he was living, what he and I wanted at the time was to be able to moderate, to keep partying, to do it better,
Sure.
So I don't think he ever really wanted to be sober, but which is why the way it happened for him was ideal, because when most people are only going to change when they're either faced with something they don't think they can afford to lose, or they're not going to get something they don't think they can afford to live without. And for Joe, it was the success of the Eagles that he couldn't live without. So that's why he changed. For me, I would say that I was faced with there was nothing I was going to attain that convinced me to get sober. What I was going to lose, that I think part of me was not prepared to lose, was my life.
Yeah.
So he had a positive reinforcement and I had a negative reinforcement. But it took what it took for me to get sober and for him to get sober. And I think Joe and I are very different people in that way. I'm somebody whose main life lesson is about individuation and authenticity and empowerment and resilience, learning to stand on my own 2 feet and to make the hard choices and take control of my life. Whereas Joe's life lesson might be more about being embracing, opening up to family and love and a support system, because he was very self-supporting and resilient and empowered in a lot of ways, but he was all alone.
Yeah.
And I was not empowered in any way. And so being forced to kind of make that choice on my own was the lesson for me. That was what the universe needed to see me do.
Yeah.
It's I gotta say, like I said, those last chapters are harrowing, but I'm very happy you made it through. If nothing else, for this wonderful book and this great conversation we're having today. This is a lot of fun, and I think I just have one last question for you, and it's similar to the one I just asked. On the note of addiction and lessons that can be learned from this book, what do you think are people who may not be facing addictions themselves, but are close to people who are dealing with those issues, or maybe coming out of addiction and into recovery? What can people who are sort of observing it, what can they learn from this book?
Yeah. It's a hard position to be in, because the behavior of an addict is so frustrating and seemingly so illogical that most people just feel like their hands are tied. They don't know what to do. They try everything. They try logic. They try being nice. They try being tough, and they're sort of stuck. I think one thing that helps bring a little bit of comfort is recognizing that the addict didn't get there by themselves usually. There's almost always some sort of adverse childhood experiences, so it's automatic to almost want to blame them for being so crazy, when the truth is, if you can remember that they got there through a process of life beating them up a bit and not having the coping skills or support system usually to handle it, and therefore turning to drugs and alcohol, sometimes that can at least make their behavior a little more tolerable and understandable. And I think also some people who are close to the addict are also people who played a part in helping them get there. Maybe their parents, or, parents play a bigger part than I think a lot of us are really wanting to believe or say. And because parents are human and they're flawed as well. So maybe you have a little part in that, and maybe it's a good idea to take a look at that, and maybe go to, consider something like Al-Anon or some therapy or some codependent reading on codependency. So they didn't get there on their own. You may have a small part in it, you may not. Just keep in mind that, and this is one of the main reasons I wrote my book, I remember what was going on in my head at the time. I know it looked crazy, the decisions I was making, but I remember them and I can articulate them. And I wanted to explain the chaos. I wanted to map out the crazy for loved ones so that they could understand what's going on in the head of their addicted loved one. And if they can understand that there's a certain logic to the way they're behaving, it can help them sort of work with that, work with that crazy logic, and just remember that also the addict is hiding their shame. So don't do anything to trigger their shame. And it's hard not to, because you just want to shake them, but triggering their shame is only going to send them the other direction. Yeah. So, if we're going to meet the addict where they're at, we need a better map. And I hope my book can provide a little bit of that mapped out territory, so we can understand where they came from, why they do what they do, and what it's going to take to entice them to get better. And I wrote a whole book to hopefully illuminate a little bit of that, at least what worked for me, for people who are like really hardcore. I was such a low bottom that I had two directions. I was going to end up in one of two places. I was either going to get sober or I was going to die within a matter of hours or days. Yeah. And, a lot of people have issues that aren't so intense, and those are the harder cases, because how do you really convince someone whose life is only a little messed up to get sober? Right. Yeah. It's a tough thing. My heart goes out to them.
Yeah. Well, sort of one of the things you talk about in the book is like there's a couple of moments near the end of your time with Joe when I recall what you said earlier about Ringo and Barbara offering to put you on a flight to rehab. And there were other moments where you had friends who were concerned about you and tried to point you in a direction of recovery. Joe was right there with you for a lot of this, maybe not to the same level, but like, was there anyone that you noticed in his social circle saying like, hey man, you're getting a little out of hand here, is there something we can do? Did anyone try and, before the Eagles, try and gently nudge him towards recovery?
I can't think of any specific instances, but I have this vague sort of memory of whenever somebody would even suggest in the most gentle way anything along those lines, like they would immediately be ousted from our circle. Also, almost everyone in our lives was on his payroll. So it was a very, so expressing anything, even a little concern at the wrong time or in the wrong way could mean losing your livelihood. Yeah.
It sounds like addictions have a strong immune system or autoimmune.
Yeah. There was, when Joe went to Hazelden, I forget again what year, 89 or 90, whatever. I remember being told that it was Smokey, his new road manager, who talked him into it. I don't know if David Spiro, a longtime friend of Joe's who managed him for a while, if he had anything to do with it. And I have to imagine that it happened every now and then. But I do know for a fact that most of the people close to him, from, Joe Vitale and Rick the bass player and Smokey and a lot of people close to him, they talked about the situation behind his back. They were worried about him. But, but how much they said to him around me, almost nothing. And I think partly because they feared for their jobs, but also partly because they probably knew it would not work and it would put a wedge between them, which would actually have a boomerang effect and make things worse. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So addicts do that. Addicts ensure that, and And I did that. I cut off the two best friends I had in LA. I cut them off because they were worried about me.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't want to get sober, you're not going to allow anyone around you who's going to try to convince you to do it.
Right. And then with recovery, there's sort of a reverse process, going back to what we were saying about, like, now you've got to get the enablers, just, maybe nothing personal about it, but if you're using, you got to go,
Yeah. Even if it's just someone you used to use with who says, well, I'll never use around you again. If they remind you of all those times that it triggers something in your brain, it triggers a craving in your brain, even if they don't mean to do it, if they're not using, if you used to use with them, you see them and you remember, and then all of a sudden, a trigger.
Interesting. Well, Kristin, I got to say, this has been an absolute best case scenario interview. This has been so much fun. I am so flattered and honored you were the debut guest of this podcast. It means a lot to me. I love the stories we talked about. And I hope, sometime you'll come back on, because I know you're a Stevie Ray Vaughan fan. And, you got your punk rock history. These are all topics I'd love to ask you about at a different time. But I think we've gone on pretty well, enough for two episodes.
It was tons of fun, because I don't always get to talk about the stories in the book, just because a lot of podcasts, you got like 30 minutes or whatever, and so you get off on a tangent and you just stay there. But so thank you for that. Thank you for letting me share some of the stories in the book verbally. That was great. And I'm delighted to be your debut guest, and I will come back anytime. I'm hoping to write another book about early sobriety and my first real relationship in sobriety at some point, as soon as I find time. So
I was just going to ask what your future plans were.
Yeah, I want to. The biggest issue I faced when I got sober was this fear of intimacy. I was so lonely, but I didn't know how to be close to people, and so that was my 10-year struggle. And at the 10-year mark is when I fell in love and had this wonderful year-long relationship that helped sort of heal me and lift me up to become my most empowered, authentic self. And so it's not quite as tragic of a story, and a lot funnier, a lot sexier, because it's a lot about dating and making every mistake in the book. I just have to find time to sit down and write it.
Where can people find you online?
Very easy, KristinCasey.com, and Kristin is spelled with an I-N, so it's KristinCasey.com. And all my social media links are attached to there. My coaching work, there's a page for my coaching work, a page about my writing. You can get to Facebook and Twitter from there.
Wonderful. Okay. Do you write fairly regularly?
I do little pieces. I'm writing a magazine article right now. I do, blog posts here and there. I haven't worked on any short stories in a while. I've been outlining my next book and writing some passages as they come to me. So I write every week, a couple times a week.
Wow.
But I haven't been publishing anything.
Well, we'll have to look forward to that next book, hopefully sooner than later. And then I guess the last thing you should tell me a little bit about, because I'm not terribly familiar with it, is your work as an intimacy coach.
Yeah, so an intimacy coach is it's in the field of sex therapy. What I do is sort of in the field of sex therapy. I mostly work with men. I mean, intimacy coaches work with men, women, couples. I in general mainly work with men, and I work with men who are experiencing anything from emotionally based sexual dysfunction, from premature ejaculation to inhibited ejaculation to erectile dysfunction, or porn dependency, which is sort of becoming more of a thing in recent years because of the ubiquitous, it's on everybody's cell phone.
Oh, yeah.
So, I work with I'm both a dating and intimacy coach. So I work with men who have just, dating anxiety, intimacy fears, all along those lines. So it's a type of counseling. It's very hands-on. It's short-term. It's not like therapy that goes on for months and months or years. It's usually short-term, 1 or 2 months at a time. But I describe it better on my website. I should get better at a little sort of, elevator pitch about it. every intimacy coach works a little bit differently, but for the most part, that kind of covers it. If you're experiencing any issues around intimacy that are manifesting physically or socially, and they're emotionally based versus medically based, that's what I work with.
And people can find out more about that on your website, that same website.
Yeah. There's a whole page that goes into detail, and then any questions they can just email me, and I fill them in as I get questions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic, Kristin. Thank you so much for your time and for your stories and for all the fun we've had this morning. I can't say this enough for those listening. Buy this book, buy her book, and buy it now in paperback. You know.
Yeah, let's take a look.
Paperback version.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's like the hardback only in color. So yeah, thank you so much. This has been a real joy. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay.
Thanks.
And that's it. That was the conclusion to my interview with Kristin Casey, author of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh. So once again, I have to say thanks to Kristin for coming on the show and being such a fantastic debut guest for the show. It really meant a lot. And I can't say this enough. Buy her book. If you found anything that we discussed in either parts of this interview interesting at all, go out and buy her book and get the full story. Because if you can believe it or not, even with the 2-hour conversation we had, we barely scratched the surface of all the stuff she has in that book. So, again, I really, really recommend getting it, especially now that it's out in paperback. And she's even doing signed copies. So if you want a signed copy, I would jump on that right now, because you never really know how long an author will do that. You can find her book on her website, KristinCasey.com. That's on there along with her social media pages, her other writings, and of course more information about her work as an intimacy coach. And then after you got her book and follow her on social media, please follow me on social media. I am at Play That Podcast on Twitter. I am Play That Rock and Roll on Facebook, but if you search Play That Podcast, all one word, you'll find us there. And on YouTube, I finally have a URL, youtube.com/c/Play That Rock and Roll. Note the N between rock and roll. And you can find us there and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That would be great. And then looking ahead, our next episode is going to be another interview. This time I'm going to talk to Austin Trunick, who is the author of the Canon Film Guide. Volume 1, with Volume 2 coming out sometime next year. If you're not familiar with Canon films, you're probably going to be a little confused about how it relates to classic rock and roll, which is what this show is all about. But if you tune in, you'll find out. So looking forward to that. That was a great conversation. Austin's a very cool guy, so you'll definitely want to stick around and listen to that, even if you're not familiar with Canon films. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much for listening. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star rating and a good review. That sort of thing really helps a show in its early stages, which we absolutely still are. So, again, the big 4 things you can do to support this show that mean a lot to me is, number 1, listen to the show. Number 2, recommend the show to a friend. 3, follow us on social media. And 4, give us a good review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Wherever you can post a review, please do. It's much appreciated on my end. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll just say one last time, Joe Walsh, please play us out.
I close my eyes and listen carefully. The silence starts to get loud. It's like your favorite station, playing your favorite song.
Absolutely one of my favorite podcasts. Got to give them a listen.